Chapter 3 Happy Days at Eagle's Nest. Then came vital news for Jadwiga. Her parents had called her home. However, William's father had not yet consented to her going. Despite the kindness of her hosts, she could not feel settled, content to be away from Mary and her mother and father. She would not forget her German, forget Duke Albert and the things he and others had taught her, but she wanted to go home. Nor had it been easy for her parents to have her away. Neither King Louis nor Queen Elizabeth dared face the personal grief or the dynastic danger that must follow the loss of either remaining daughter. The Queen Mother, Elizabeth, having fled from trouble in Poland, was now in Hungary. Jadwiga adored this grandmother, to whom Louis's children were as dear as her own, which was saying much. Her right hand bore mute witness to her maternal love. Only one finger remained. People were careful not to talk too openly about this mutilation, for the story behind it was no credit to a civilized court. During Charles Robert's reign, because of a wrong done to beautiful Clara Zack, a maid of honor by King Casimir, then visiting at Visegrad, Clara's infuriated father burst in upon the royal family as they sat in the dining hall, and thrust right and left with his sword. When he attacked Prince Louis and his brother Andrew, their mother rushed in front of them and with uplifted hand stopped the sword. Her treasurer, leaping to the rescue, felled the man with a bronze poleaxe, and others finished him off. The rest of the story the court preferred to forget, for the punishment visited on the unfortunate Clara and her brothers and sisters belonged to savage rather than Christian annals. At this time, mother and son were again discussing the Polish succession prospects. He welcomed her counsel. It was she who had helped him win the first consent of the Poles to his proposal that one of his daughters should inherit their crown, for in Poland, as in Hungary, the magnates maintained their right to choose from within the reigning line, the new ruler. It seemed wise to call a meeting of the Poles at once, to have them reaffirm their promises. But winter and spring with its melting snows were bad times for congresses, so King Louis decided to let matters run along until summer. Then it was that he further pressed Duke Leopold to shorten the time of Jadwiga's stay in Austria and send her home to Hungary. But the Habsburg refused to consider this change. His alliance with Hungary seemed more secure with William's fiancée at his own court. However, he decided to journey to Hungary and discuss this and other matters personally with Louis. There he did agree that Jadwiga should return, and William with her, to continue his training. Jadwiga was to regain her family, and without losing her friend. In her thoughts, William was already an inseparable part of that family. Now with a double royal escort they traveled eastward, with pet dogs and horses, along the curving river road. They stopped first at Visegrad, where Jadwiga's family were making a brief visit. Young and old particularly loved this place, where King Louis had spent his youth, for Visegrad had been his father's capital. Here he had learned the duties of knight and ruler, been trained in law and history, politics, theology, and astronomy, studied Latin, French, and German, pored over the lives of St. Ladislaus of Hungary and Alexander the Great, his chosen heroes. Every foot of Visegrad's slopes and beaches was part of him. Home, Jadza, mother. Elizabeth was the first to gather her into glad arms, then her father, and after the embraces and questioning of the elders, she and William were crowned with flower wreaths by Mary and Sigismund, and girls and pages of the court, and escorted with noisy joys to Salomon Tower Place on the hillside. Several palaces lifted from this royal hill. There was room in them for the entertainment of 2 kings and many minor princes with their suites. Eagle's Nest, restless rulers had called Visegrad, from whose rocky summit we can watch and at whose water-lapped base we can enjoy. and they encircled it with granite walls and towers. On the outcropping rock of the crest, they raised a stern combination of fortress and church. The forbidding upper level could be reached by ladder only. 2/3 down the steep slope, they set the more accessible Solomon Tower Palace, where King Louis and his family usually lived. And on the sandy plain between the Danube beach and the hill rise ran a girdle of palaces, surrounded by formal and informal gardens. Here days of festival and tournament unfolded. Often at night, music from the higher towers floated down upon the scene. It was not surprising that the young people of the court, as well as their elders, preferred Eagle's Nest to any other place they knew. In Solomon Tower, Jadwiga was escorted past the lower kitchens and dining rooms up to the fourth of the six floors. This was the women's floor. Below it were the king's quarters, and above it the knights. It was divided into 4 chambers, of which Queen Elizabeth's, with its great fireplace, yellow plastered walls hung with tapestries, and tiled limestone floor made comfortable by fur and eastern rugs, was the most important. Its deeply recessed windows gave from alcove platforms reached by wooden steps. From one window, the sisters looked out on the Emerald Hill slope and breathed pine and fir fragrances. From the opposite one, they peered dizzyingly down on the Danube. This room was Jadwiga's home at Visegrad. Visegrad woods invited to picnics. Now that King Louis could no longer hunt, was it true, as people whispered, that their great Louis had on one of his southeastern campaigns contracted the White Plague? Had a slow leprosy fastened upon him? Was it this dread secret that made him more and more keep apart from men? Now that he had given up the chase, he welcomed picnics and other family outings Elizabeth devotedly planned. This century's treatment for the prevalent leprosy was travel, movement, life out of doors, combined with a diet of viper's meat. And certainly during Jadwiga's girlhood, her father followed the first part of the prescription. This meant that she and Mary enjoyed more excursions, more impromptu shore and forest experiences with father and mother and their intimate court group than they could have known had King Louis been well. At times, Elizabeth was shaken by foreboding fears and redoubled her effort to keep Louis and the children happy. Nothing that her love could supply did they lack. Indeed, some said that it would have been better for Mary and Jadwiga had their mother's solicitude been less intense. High on the hill is a meadow, a snowdrop and violet garden in spring and later in the year aflame with fireweed and asters. Here, King Louis kept a well-stocked carp pond, a favorite excursion objective. Often Jadwiga and William, Sigismund and Mary, and a group of friends in outdoor costumes, usually of brown or green, relieved by brighter reds. The girls' dresses straight falling and girdled. The boys, a combination of short coat or tunic and tight-fitting hose, climbed to the pond with poles and nets. Then, if King Louis and Queen Elizabeth went, as they frequently did, to inspect the hilltop fortress, where building and repairing was always going on, the young people carried their catch higher. Chef Peter, whose father had been cook to Louis's father, would include it on the picnic menu. Doubtless a normal amount of discord marked such adventures. The princes were both German, destined to be royal brothers-in-law, but Sigismund, several years older than William, did not conceal his feeling of superiority. And though William may have been willing to ignore Sigismund's ruder way, others were not. Jadwiga probably less than anyone else. This must have caused Mary many an unhappy hour, especially since it was known that Sigismund was unpopular with her mother as well. However, chroniclers diffuse but a happy harmony over these early years. Mossy paths, pleasant undersoft, loose pointed leather shoes, zigzagged up the wooded slopes to the top, some 750 feet above the Danube. There, 2 concentric walls powerfully encircled the crest, an inner chapel tower thrusting above them. Inside the moat and deep-set gate, with its guard's oak balcony overhead, stretched the narrow courtyard, flanked by living quarters, the women's at the right, the men's at the left. And higher still, reached only by ladder, was an upper parapet. Perched thus against the sky, looking down on the bronze river and off across ridges and plains, it is not surprising that people came from the corners of Europe to see Eagle's Nest, and that minstrels glowingly pictured it. To King Louis, an excursion with his beloved Elizabeth and his daughters meant not only diversion, but opportunity to further the preparation for their future responsibilities. And as this decade of 1370 closed, and he felt himself losing in his battle against the sinister leprosy, he pressed that preparation as never before. Carefully chosen instructors were responsible for the court's educational program, and Buda was counted one of the best training schools in Europe. Nobles coveted places there for their sons and daughters, but Louis himself was first teacher, just as his father had been his own. Despite the turbulence of the century, life had a certain continuity rarely found today. Sons of secular and religious teachers who taught Louis's grandfather were instructors to his father, and their sons to himself. His father believed that the heir to the throne should at the earliest possible age be introduced to the secrets of government and the conduct of affairs of state. Louis was scarcely 10 when he added his signature, and sealed with his own seal an important pact between Hungary and Bohemia. About this time he was a witness, too, to the historic three rulers' meeting, the kings of Hungary, Bohemia, and Poland, at Visegrad. Early on his boy's mind was impressed the picture of his father as a leading figure in Europe, and of Hungary as a great power. And now he, following his father's practice, provided for Mary and Jadwiga and their fiancés like opportunities. He included them in instructive events. One likes to think of him at Eagle's Nest, clad in brown leather coat and green tunic and hose, the informality of his costume detracting nothing from his kingly appearance, gathering the young people about him, and as they looked down on the world of beauty and danger unrolled below, charting for them the political world erected upon it. At their feet, and spreading farther than they could imagine, lay Hungary, that William and Jadwiga would rule. To the north, Poland. Sigismund and Mary would go there. Beyond it were the pagan Lithuanians. William and Sigismund would go on crusades to convert them. Jadwiga and Mary would support such Christian efforts. Then, shudderingly, they would turn to the southeast. Armies must hold, drive back the Turk. From that direction, too, swept the Black Plague. Soldiers could not stop that scourge. Refuges, hospitals must be founded. And the White Plague. But Christ had healed the leper. In caring for the leper, one practiced a Christian virtue. So people thought differently of the White Plague. Above all, the growth of towns must be encouraged. Louis relied on his burghers, and courts and the administration of justice must be improved. He had often traveled about his realm in disguise, sleeping at a farmhouse or in some out-of-the-way village, to find out what people really thought of his rule. Hungary had its Magna Carta, but because of his subjects' confidence in his ability and interest in their welfare, he was allowed to rule practically as absolute monarch. He rarely assembled the diets, preferring to transact the business of state through his royal council, to which he admitted representatives of the lower nobility and the towns. As Louis talked of these and other matters, what assurance did he gather, as each pupil revealed his qualities of mind and temperament? From Mary's gentle following? From the makeup of these two boys he had chosen? From Jadwiga's swift look of understanding, the intensity in that eager face? Besides such a high hour under the sky, we can place a complimentary one in the courtyard. After the scramble down, the girls went to the queen's apartment next to the church, the boys to the king's, opposite. There they washed in silver basins and freshened their toilets. Jadwiga's mother always brought with her quantities of their favorite perfume, Reine de Hongrie, made after grandmother Elizabeth's recipe. It was supposed to possess magical power to preserve youth and to cure rheumatism. Indeed, it is still today popular in certain parts of Hungary. Meanwhile, The long tables were being spread. Musicians were getting ready their flutes and zithers. Jadwiga's sheepdog and other privileged hounds were running about. She and Mary themselves decorated with wild flowers the table already heaped with nuts and fruits. Their mother would be at the head of the royal table, for she always had the place of honor and was served first. Chef Peter had outdone himself. He felt that his dishes were particularly well spiced. The royal family, like all Hungarians, enjoyed highly seasoned food. His wines had been properly chilled in the ice caves, for cold drinks went well with high seasoning. After all had found their places, he advanced to the accompaniment of a spirited march, holding high his large platter bearing a boar's head with an apple in its mouth, and surrounded by elk's nostrils and bear's feet, and deposited it with a flourish before the laughing Louis. However, even on picnics, the young people were not to forget their manners. No fingers in the mustard pot or other general dishes. They must use either a fresh crust of bread or a spoon. No blowing on food to cool it. No elbow on the table or using its cloth as towel. No picking of teeth with a knife. Between courses, the king called the betrothed couples to him, teasingly admonishing them, to the delight of the others, until they were rescued by Elizabeth. To an appeal for a story, he responded with a hair-raising narrative of an encounter with pagan bandits. Then he himself called for a song and led them with clapping and stamping. How many courses? How many amusing tales told? They were blended in another memory that for Jadwiga would grow not dimmer but sharper with the years. One compensation for having to leave Visegrad was the barge journey to Buda, some 30 miles downstream. There was usually a long procession of these barges bearing the king and queen, their suites, dogs, and other animals and furnishings. Everything could be piled easily on the broad bobbed boats that floated on the current, needing only the occasional pull of one of the long ropes attached to the accompanying horses on shore, and other occasional guiding by the long oars. There was no question as to the way the young people of the court preferred to travel. The excitements of navigating a river procession far exceeded those of the progress of a cavalcade. These lasted from the initial thrill of being taken in canoes to the main barge floating the red and white flags of the Magyars, and being pulled up over its side to the end of the journey. All day the barge bearing the royal family floated beside the willow and poplar-fringed bank from which white geese noisily protested their presence. They wound around small, low-clustered villages with thatched roofs, and larger ones with slate roofs, all of them bright with gardens and bowery with linden trees. Wagons, drawn by long-horned oxen, and piled with lumber or kegs or baskets of fruit and vegetables, plied between these hamlets. Farther to the right of the broad river course ran the St. Pilis mountain ranges, oak-forested and rich in minerals, and below them spread fields of wheat and rye. Hills, topped by castle or monastery, passed in unending panorama, while again and again from the plain or the near roadside some fragment of palace, or of the Roman wall and aqueduct that once paralleled the Danube, thrust into view. There were many reminders of Roman days and of the city of Aquincum, where flourished in the 2nd century. The road beyond the river beach had been a kind of Appian way, flanked by tombs and palaces and baths. Now spires and bell towers of Christian cloisters and chapels looked down on what time and the Turks had left of the Roman structures. Jadwiga and Mary watched especially for the ruins of the Colosseum, which they often visited. It had been almost as large as that in Rome. Nearer Buda, they passed St. Margaret's Island, almost a mile long, where, too, had been Roman palaces and baths and temples. But what interested them chiefly was the romantic story of St. Margaret, whose name the island now bore. A visit to its convent was one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite outings. For Jadwiga and William, this was history learned not out of musty books or by dry preachments, but rather actually lived as they floated silently by castle and hill and chapel, listening to legends repeated by court teachers and singers in whose tales and songs yesterday and today seemed indistinguishable.